Quick question. What if I told you there's a job out there where a single person with steady hands and about 15 years of training can casually make more money in 1 year than most people make in their entire lifetime? No, I'm not talking about being an influencer who unboxes phone cases. I'm talking about a neurosurgeon, someone who routinely earns north of $900,000 a year cutting into actual human brains for a living. And here's the part that's going to wreck your brain a little. Pun fully intended. A brand new airline pilot fresh out of training starts at around $100,000 a year before they've even flown a real passenger flight solo for a major airline. Meanwhile, some of the smartest, hardest working teachers on the planet, the people literally responsible for creating the neurosurgeons and pilots of tomorrow, are making a fraction of that. So today we're asking the question that secretly haunts almost everyone by the time they're 25. Why do some jobs pay absurd amounts of money, while other equally important jobs barely cover rent? Is it about intelligence, effort, risk, or is something else entirely going on here? Let's get into it, because the answer is weirder and honestly more interesting than just go to medical school. Okay, here's the puzzle, and it's a genuinely strange one once you actually sit with it. If you rank jobs purely by how much good this job does for humanity, teachers, nurses, and sanitation workers would probably be sitting near the top. Civilization quite literally falls apart without garbage collection within about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That's not an exaggeration. That's an actual estimate from urban planning research on what happens when waste management stops. And yet, sanitation workers in most countries make a small fraction of what, say, an investment banker makes, someone whose job, depending on who you ask, mostly involves moving numbers between spreadsheets and occasionally causing global financial crises. So clearly, how important is this job to society is not what's setting the price tag. Something else is doing the actual math behind the scenes. And once you see what that something else is, you'll never look at a salary number the same way again. This is where economics quietly turns into something that feels almost like a science experiment, with humans as the test subjects. Here's the concept that explains almost the entire mystery, and it's beautifully simple once you see it. Pay isn't determined by how valuable a job is. It's determined by the combination of how valuable the job is and how hard it is to replace the person doing it. Economists actually have a clean way of framing this. Think of every profession as sitting somewhere on 2 different scales. Scale 1. How much value does this create? Scale 2. How many people on Earth can actually do this well? A neurosurgeon creates enormous value. Obviously, saving someone's life or restoring their ability to walk is about as valuable as a human service can get. But here's the catch. The supply of people capable of doing brain surgery is microscopically small. It takes roughly 15 to 17 years from the decision to become a doctor to becoming a fully licensed, practicing neurosurgeon. Along the way, you need to survive medical school, which can cost up to $400,000 before you've earned a single dollar back. Then years of brutal residency training, working 80-hour weeks for relatively modest pay, all while a meaningful percentage of people who start this path don't finish it. That combination, massive value created, plus a brutally small supply of qualified people, is the exact formula for an enormous paycheck. Now flip it. A teacher also creates enormous value. Genuinely enormous, arguably civilization-defining value. But the supply side of that equation is completely different. Becoming a qualified teacher typically takes 4 to 5 years, costs a fraction of medical school, and the resulting pool of qualified candidates is, relatively speaking, much larger. High value, but also high supply. And when supply is high relative to demand, the price the market is willing to pay simply doesn't climb as steeply, no matter how important the underlying work actually is. Here's an analogy that makes this click immediately. Imagine water and diamonds. Water is, without exaggeration, the single most valuable substance on Earth for human survival. You will die in about 3 days without it. Diamonds, meanwhile, are essentially decorative carbon that does almost nothing for your survival. And yet, diamonds cost dramatically more than water. Why? Because water is everywhere, and diamonds are rare. Economists actually call this exact puzzle the diamond water paradox, and it was one of the founding head-scratchers of modern economics, dating all the way back to Adam Smith in the 1700s. Price doesn't track usefulness. Price tracks usefulness divided by how much of it is available. Salaries work on the exact same logic. A profession's paycheck is essentially society silently solving the diamond water paradox over and over again for every single job that exists. Let's look at the actual numbers, because watching this pattern play out in real data is genuinely satisfying in a nerdy sort of way. According to 2026 salary data compiled from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and major compensation surveys, neurosurgeons sit at the very top of the individual profession pay pyramid, with median total compensation near $960,000 a year, and top performers in competitive markets pulling in over $1.2 million annually. Anesthesiologists aren't far behind, averaging somewhere between $330,000 and $470,000, depending on the survey and region. Now, look at the supply side of those exact same professions. The total number of practicing neurosurgeons in the entire United States is estimated at around 4,000 to 5,000 people. For a country of over 330 million, that's roughly one neurosurgeon for every 70,000 Americans. The scarcity isn't an accident of the market. It's an engineered bottleneck, built from over a decade of selective training, brutal attrition, and enormous upfront cost. Compare that to software engineering, a field absolutely overflowing with money and headlines, but worth examining carefully. Senior AI and machine learning engineers at top tech companies can pull in $200,000 to $700,000 in total compensation. But here's the twist: the data shows clearly in 2026. General software engineering employment growth is actually slowing down, partly because AI-assisted coding tools are reducing how many engineers companies need to hire for routine work. The supply of competent general-purpose coders has grown enormously over the past 15 years through boot camps, online courses, and computer science programs worldwide, while the supply of people who can do genuinely cutting-edge AI research remains tiny. So within the same broad field, you get one shrinking pay lane and one explosively growing pay lane, purely because of how scarce the actual skill is, not how techy the job title sounds. And then there's the airline pilot case, which I think is the most fascinating data point in this entire topic. Regional airlines' starting salaries for first-year pilots have increased by roughly 546% since the year 2000, according to aviation industry data. Not because flying planes suddenly became 5 times more valuable to society. It's because a massive wave of pilots from previous decades is retiring all at once. Training pipelines were disrupted during the pandemic years, and the supply of qualified pilots cratered just as demand for air travel rebounded hard. Same value to society as 20 years ago. Wildly different supply, wildly different paycheck. Here's the truly counterintuitive insight, the one that I think genuinely changes how you should think about your own career, your kid's career, basically anyone's career. The single biggest lever controlling your earning potential isn't your intelligence, and it isn't even really your effort, although both certainly help. It's how artificially scarce your specific combination of skills is relative to how much value that combination creates. This explains something that confuses a lot of people. Why do some genuinely brilliant, hardworking people stay stuck at modest salaries their entire careers, while some merely competent people in the right niche earn fortunes? It's rarely about raw talent. It's about whether you've positioned yourself in a lane where very few people can do what you do, while a lot of people need it done. This also explains why certain skills suddenly spike in value out of nowhere. Cybersecurity expertise was a relatively quiet, modestly paid specialty 20 years ago. Then the world went digital. Every company suddenly needed protection from hackers, and the supply of genuinely skilled security specialists hadn't caught up yet. Result: senior cybersecurity salaries in 2026 now routinely exceed $210,000, with some specialized roles paying considerably more, purely because demand sprinted ahead of supply and hasn't been caught yet. And this is the part that should genuinely make you pause. Scarcity can be engineered deliberately. and it can also evaporate without warning. Medical licensing boards intentionally limit how many new doctors enter the system every year, partly for genuine quality control, but the side effect is permanently elevated doctor salaries. Meanwhile, entire categories of decently paid jobs have had their scarcity evaporate almost overnight when a new technology, a new training pipeline, or in some cases artificial intelligence itself, suddenly created a flood of capable new entrants. The market isn't rewarding how hard you work or even strictly how smart you are. It's running a constant, silent auction on how replaceable you are. And the professions sitting at the very top of the pay charts are, almost without exception, the ones that have made themselves the hardest to replace. So what do you actually do with this information, especially if you're sitting there reconsidering your entire career path right now? First, if you're choosing a field, the question worth asking isn't just, is this field valuable? Most fields that exist do create some value, otherwise they wouldn't exist at all. The sharper question is how artificially limited is the supply of people who can do this well, and is that limitation likely to persist or to dissolve? A field with a genuinely high barrier to entry, extensive training, certification, or rare combinations of skill tend to hold its pricing power for much longer than a field anyone can enter with a weekend course. Second, this framework helps you understand why follow your passion alone is risky financial advice, even though it's emotionally appealing. Passion plus extreme scarcity is a fantastic combination. Passion plus a flooded, easily replicated skill set is a much harder road financially, regardless of how hardworking or talented you're within it. Third, and this matters enormously heading into the back half of this decade, artificial intelligence is actively reshaping which skills are scarce and which ones suddenly aren't. Routine coding, basic data entry, even some forms of junior legal research are becoming less scarce as AI tools absorb that work. Meanwhile, skills that require physical presence, deep specialized judgment, or genuine human trust, surgery, skilled trades like electricians and power line workers, high-level strategic leadership, are proving much harder to automate away, which is part of why some surprisingly traditional blue-collar paths are now paying six figures with far less debt and far less time investment than a medical degree. The genuinely useful move isn't necessarily chasing whatever pays the most today. It's understanding the supply and value equation well enough to predict where scarcity is heading next and positioning yourself somewhere on that curve before everyone else catches on. So let's circle back to where we started. A neurosurgeon making nearly $1 million a year. A pilot whose starting pay jumped 500% in 2 decades. A teacher doing arguably more foundational work for civilization than almost anyone, making a fraction of either. None of that reflects what any of these people actually deserve in some cosmic moral sense. It reflects a cold, silent, constantly shifting equation that humanity has been running, often without realizing it, since at least the 1700s, when a Scottish economist first noticed that water and diamonds break our intuitions about value in exactly the same way salaries do today. The uncomfortable truth is that the market doesn't pay for importance. It pays for scarcity multiplied by importance. And the moment something becomes easy to replace, whether that's a skill, a role, or eventually uncomfortably certain entire professions, the price tag follows that scarcity downward, no matter how much good that work still does in the world. So here's the question I'll leave you with, and I think it's worth sitting with longer than you'd expect. In a world where artificial intelligence is rewriting which skills are rare and which ones aren't week by week, what are you doing right now to make yourself harder to replace, rather than simply more valuable? Because in this particular economic experiment, it turns out those have never actually been the same question. Like, subscribe, and comment. Which surprised you more, the neurosurgeon's salary or the pilot's 546 jump? Let us know below.